Okay, well, the latest edition of Patrick O'Flynn's O'Flynn Factor has been published today on Patreon, patreon.com/Heave if you want to read it, or become a member here on YouTube by hitting join down below. Patrick, today talking about Afghanistan, of course, the Taliban takeover, the withdrawal, and you really highlighting Tony Blair in all of this.
Well, yes, what a disaster it's been. I'm highlighting Tony Blair because, I was political editor of the Daily Express back when the Allies first went into Afghanistan, followed Tony Blair doing his globe trotting and as he put together the kind of coalition against terror. And I just note he doesn't want to talk about Afghanistan at the moment. He's going on about the climate change conference. And I don't think it's really he should be allowed to get away without reflecting on his own role. Because while I think most of us agree it was right to go into Afghanistan at the end of 2001 and chase out Al Qaeda, give the Taliban a bloody nose, that was all achieved within a year. What then the likes of Blair did was to turn the mission into nation building, ending the poppy farms, getting girls going to school, producing a multi-party democracy that had never existed in Afghanistan before. And that was the sort of task that he must have known he wouldn't be around to see through to completion. He couldn't guarantee the appetite of the West would be big enough to see it through to completion, or even that it was achievable at all. And so he sacrificed through his decision making hundreds of British soldiers, thousands more injured, and ultimately war weariness kicked in. We had to do what America wanted anyway, as they're the leading power, and we've got the worst of all worlds.
Patrick, what do you think the legacy is going to be, of Tony Blair? You're right that almost 20 years after the first Allied troops set foot in Afghanistan, the mission has failed in the most chaotic, humiliating, and catastrophic fashion imaginable.
Yes, and I think for quite a while now, the consensus has been there, and it's been fairly obvious that the Iraq mission was a disaster. But there was still some hope that the Afghan mission would be seen as a qualified success. I mean, Al Qaeda was chased out, albeit it took another 10 years or so to get bin Laden. The Western troop commitment was much lower, our casualties were much lower, and yet the Taliban was being kept at bay. And nobody really knew about the nation building stuff, whether this sort of new moderate Afghan civil society and institutions and army was viable, and it could only be judged when the big test came and the West left. And the big test has happened and it's collapsed. So the nation building side didn't work at all. We could have gone in and out within a year, having taught the Taliban a lesson. We didn't, and I think it's another real stain on Tony Blair's legacy. And I just think we need to be very skeptical about our politicians in the future. The here today, gone tomorrow Democratic politician. For a while, we thought that David Cameron's action in Libya was talked up as a great success. It's turned Libya into something much worse than it ever was. And as we've seen, David Cameron's doing all right for himself in his post-political career. So my plea would be to be much more skeptical about our leaders who don't hang around for long, doing big dreams and using armed forces too readily and interfering in parts of the world that they don't understand. I can't think of a single mission now that could be described as an unalloyed success in the last 30 years or so.
Patrick, what do you make of what US President Joe Biden had to say yesterday?
Yes, I think another point is that Biden has tried to say it's all Donald Trump's fault, and I think the American people had decided they wanted to bring the boys home, as it were, and the girls home. And Trump had put the precursor agreements in place. But, Joe Biden doesn't have to follow Donald Trump's agenda, either the overall strategy or the implementation of the tactical withdrawal plan. He owns that mess altogether. And I think his foreign policy reputation for viewers of particular vintage. You think back to Jimmy Carter and his disaster in Iran, and the hostage siege and the bungled attempts to rescue them, and that really helped sweep him away as a one-term president. Well, I think the questions about Biden is, does he even make the end of the term? And I was quite struck by his comments where he claimed that the mission was never about nation building. It was only about expelling Al-Qaeda. Well, you know, Joe Biden was vice president under Barack Obama when Al-Qaeda was rid of, and it was all about nation building. You know, if he didn't think that appropriate then, why wasn't he saying let's leave and making that known? So I think he's kind of making it up in retrospect there. His credibility on foreign affairs is shot to pieces. And yes, I think it sort of sits with what Donald Trump would have done, but I don't think even Trump would have moved it through in such a chaotic, catastrophic, ill thought through, shambolic fashion as Biden has done.
And finally, Patrick, the reputation of Tony Blair, in my opinion, if you look at some of the research, his reputation lies in tatters, really, with mainstream Britain. In terms of these, you know, Iraq, in terms of Afghanistan, in terms of these foreign interventions. What impact do you think this will have in the future when we look at UK foreign policy and perhaps the future decisions made by prime ministers?
Well, hopefully it will be a very, very strong impulse that British forces should only be placed in the way of danger if there are, you know, essential British interests at direct risk. I mean, we look back at the Falklands War. We didn't start it. There was a casus belli. British people were not being allowed to be British anymore. Our territory had been invaded. We put together on our own a task force and went and got them back within a couple of months, you know, a glorious victory. And, you know, we have an ongoing deployment on the Falklands to keep the Falklands free and the Falklands people British. That is the ideal defendable war, getting dragged in on the coattails of America, talking the talk and big aims, when the brutal truth is, if America turns on a sixpence, we do too. I just think there's no credibility left in that strategy whatsoever. So I hope we're entering an era where we don't overstretch our forces, and that we do have prime ministers who think much more carefully about whether it's justified to use them, and understand that we can't export democracy down the barrel of a gun to cultures and countries which have never known it and aren't really, you know, amenable to it.
Well, if people would like to read Patrick's column, The O'Flynn Factor, do as I said, either head to patreon.com/Heaver where you can read it, or hit the join button down below here on YouTube, become a member and read it. Patrick, we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Michael.